For all of you just tuning on now, this is Never Again Live podcast. We'll have some guests later. We'll announce. We'll begin momentarily. So please, as you get started, start sharing this on Twitter or X or Facebook or YouTube or wherever good social media can be found. And without further ado, today's episode is going to be about eliminating the Iranian threats against Israel and, more importantly, presently, the prohibition of Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. Again, we're on X, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, so join us. Our guests will be our host, Meir Weinstein, the founder of Israel Now and past director of Canadian branch at JDL, as well as Meir JOLOVITZ. We got a pair of mayors and a nightmare as I look at it. And most importantly, let's always remember that this is day 313 of our hostages in captivity. 313. How tragic and sad is that? We know we just got to Tish B'Av. I hope everybody had a easy fast and a pensive time. And also, besides a day of mourning, a day of hope. So what do we find out recently? We find out that the United States government strongly opposes Ben-Gvir's visit to the Temple Mount at Tish B'Av. Who is U.S. to have any say on what Israel does, particularly the Secretary of State, who says he demonstrated a blatant disregard. A disregard for what? For our historic homeland? I find that absolutely disgusting and pitiful.
אנחנו בתשעה באב, הר הבית, האם נציין כאן את חורבן בית המקדש. אני צריך גם להגיד ביושר, יש התקדמות מאוד מאוד גדולה כאן במשילות, בריבונות. בשם כל ישראל!
So meanwhile, we're not allowed to pray on our ancestral, ancient, indigenous homeland. Yet it seems that other religions are allowed to pretty much pray anywhere they want, anytime they want. Here in London, in the streets, the British Muslims are praying. They're praying to protest the French president, and they're blocking the streets. Or New York City, in Times Square, they're allowed to pray with no repercussions, no consequences. In Paris, the same thing. San Francisco.
We're following some breaking news on the West Coast. Traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco was shut down for hours in both directions today as a group of protesters were blocking the southbound traffic mid-span. So that's the traffic going from Marin County into San Francisco. The bridge protest was the second demonstration to impact traffic in the Bay Area. Protests first reported shortly after 8 a.m., just hours after another pro-Palestinian protest closed all lanes on I-880 in Oakland. Chopper footage here of the protest on the Golden Gate Bridge showed protesters with a banner that read, "Stop the World for Gaza."
Looking at a live picture of these protesters outside LAX tonight, a couple hundred strong. They are an unnamed coalition of concerned citizens. They tell me they've been chanting all afternoon and early evening, saying things like resistance is justified, free Palestine, end the genocide. They were carrying a large banner saying, let Gaza live.
No, you're not praying on the street. You are participating in an unsanctioned rally. You are blocking traffic. You are taking over the streets. You are not allowing peaceful Canadians to just walk through and use public spaces.
Minneapolis is now the first major U.S. city to allow the Islamic call to prayer to be broadcast 5 times a day, starting.
I'm not sure if our audience heard that, but Minneapolis just approved permission for 5 calls of prayer a day. One is at 3:30 in the morning. Okay, one is at 11 o'clock at night, and they decided that it's okay.
At dawn.
Why is that mass Muslim groups can pray anywhere, anytime? New York, Los Angeles, London, Toronto, Ontario. It's absolutely amazing. While Jews are forbidden from prayer on the Temple Mount, the most ancient God-given holy site of our indigenous ancestral homeland. Peace will come when the Arabs will love their children more than they hate us. And certainly doesn't seem to be the case in any foreseeable future. So until such a time comes in our future, I prefer a powerful and proud Jewish state that is hated by the entire world than an Auschwitz that is loved by one and all. And in closing, for a little introduction, just keep in mind that the world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. So please share this on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. We'll bring our guest on momentarily. Meanwhile, do find us on Facebook and our website at israelnow.ca. Without any further ado, gentlemen, Meir, take it over, and I'm out.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you very much for that introduction. A very important show tonight. We're going to be discussing essential issues. I think that speaks to the heart of the of all these wars since the establishment of the State of Israel. The very idea of governments worldwide, which includes the government of Canada, as of today, the government of Canada also issued a statement condemning Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and other Jews for going up to the Temple Mount to pray. Now, let me explain something about the prayer on the Temple Mount for Jews. We would like to see the reestablishment of the Third Temple. However, so far that's not happening, and so far there isn't this unity that we would like to see, and so far there's no government policy. But we have taken upon ourselves to limit our prayer on the Temple Mount to a small area on the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is a vast area. Anyone who's familiar with Israel, who has gone to the Western Wall, the Kotel, that's actually a small area if you compare it to the entire area of the Temple Mount, Har Bayit. And so the Jews who do pray on the Temple Mount pray on the perimeter close to one of the walls there on the Temple Mount, and they do not interfere in any way with Muslims who are praying or who are just walking around the mosque that is up there. So again, we limit the area that we're at into a small area for a limited period of time as well, a couple hours in the morning and a couple hours in the afternoon, and that's it. And so there's worldwide condemnation of Jews going up there. What makes this even worse, the condemnation, is that the prayer service that they're talking about occurred on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the national day of mourning for the Jewish people, that it commemorates the destruction of the first temple, the second temple, and other tragedies that have occurred to the Jewish people over the ages. And so we have seen, in fact, that this condemnation has been joined by some ministers in the Israeli government, not in the government, but in the Knesset. Actually, yes, there is a minister in the government that has condemned it, Ari Deri, who's from the Shas party. And he wants to work in collaboration with an anti-religious member of the Knesset, Yair Lapid. Very interesting. But their statement of condemnation again came on Tisha B'Av, which brings back into the minds, into the memories of Jews that we commemorate the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, a story of baseless hatred. I'm not going to explain the story right now. You could look it up. But Kamsa Bar Kamsa, and it was horrible what that story represents. So we're going to talk about this goings on with the Temple Mount. We're also going to be talking, obviously, about the threats from Iran and what Israel should do and what Israel could do. And we're also talking about the proposal for a ceasefire. And in the ceasefire proposal is a demand that Israel vacate Gaza, all of it, including the Philadelphia corridor. The Philadelphia corridor is where the borders of Gaza and the Sinai, in which Israel found well over 50 huge tunnels where you could drive trucks through, and the weapons were coming through these tunnels with the approval of Egypt, who signed the Camp David Accords with Israel, peace agreement, right? Right, a peace agreement. Almost sounds like a proxy war against Israel. Allowing weapons to go into the hands of Hamas. And so the demand is that Israel leaves this area and just hopes for the best. Or on the other side, on the pro-Hamas side, they'll be smiling with delight that they'll be able to rearm and reposition themselves, and in their words, carry out many more October 7ths. Mayor JOLOVITZ, how are you tonight?
I'm well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, let's get right into it. First off, your thoughts on what's going on right now with Har-Bayit, the condemnations, and Ari Deri and Yair Lapid, and I think it in a certain sense legitimizes all these worldwide anti-Semitic protests against Jews in Israel. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, allow me to begin with a philosophical examination of the underpinnings of this conflict. The conflict, we're talking about the fact that the world, certainly those Arab nations which surround Israel, have not come to terms with the fact that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. It used to be something we speak about often. We no longer speak about it, and it's a shame. A number of years ago, I was asked to do a speech, as I often am. And while preparing for the speech, in which they were going to show clips from that documentary that was done by Alan Dershowitz called The Case for Israel, I decided to do something. Now, Alan Dershowitz originally wrote the book Case for Israel, 2004, and it became a documentary, and a very good one, actually, in 2009. So I did something. It was sort of like an intellectual exercise. I decided that I was going to Google a case for Sweden, and nothing came up in Google, case for Sweden. I decided I was going to Google a case for England, a case for Ireland, a case for Australia. Nothing came up. There was nothing on Google under the title Case for Finland. So I said, oh, okay, that's because these are all democratic nations. Let me try something else. And I Googled the case for North Korea. Nothing came up. A case for Vietnam. Nothing. Case for Saudi Arabia. And finally, a case for the Islamic Republic of Iran. And nothing came up. Apparently, the existence of Saudi Arabia and Vietnam and Australia isn't something which is in contention. No one seems to argue whether or not they have a right to exist as a state. Only Israel. But when you Google case for Israel, all of a sudden you have this rich body of work talking about whether or not an argument pro and against, whether or not it has a right to exist as a Jewish state. And you know that there's something terribly wrong. What is equally wrong is the fact that we ourselves has gone along with this reality. And every time that there is some vote at the United Nations, the UN ambassador for Israel representing Israel tries to get the roster when invited and speak eloquently on the right of the Jewish people to exist. There's something terribly perverted about that notion that we actually embrace the opportunity to convince the world. Many of the 193 nations in the United Nations are countries which are, of course, repressive regimes, authoritarian regimes, totalitarian regimes, and yet they sit in judgment of the one people, the one nation of people who actually civilized the world. Imagine Cambodia, which killed 2.3 million of its own citizens, Burundi, with living trees. They sit in judgment of the most unique enterprise in the history of man, Israel. And as I said, the tragic part of it isn't that they do it. It's the fact that we play along and ask them to consider the argument that we make as eloquent as we can why we have a right to exist. We've lost the beginning. I'm going to, today when we talk about the various things, and I'm going to make reference to a book that just came out, and an article, that an interview that appeared on the Roots Sheva today with Pipes, this professor, and he talks about the conflict, he talks about the solution, which is already a misbegotten expectation, but nonetheless, as we proceed, he talks about the Israel-Palestinian issue, Israeli-Palestinian issue, not the Israeli-Arab conflict as it used to be called, not the Arab war against Israel as it ought to be called, not the Muslim war against Jews as it even more accurately needs to be called, but he talked about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, which, if language means anything, if the narrative means anything, is already a surrender to the argument against Israel. All of a sudden, it's not the Arab world against Israel, it's Israel against the Palestinians. What we do is remarkable. We obviously said this many times in this broadcast. We are our own worst enemies, and not to learn anything. If one would argue that yes, we do this, yes, we capitulate to the language and the narrative that our enemies and our practice have adopted, but as a result, we've actually gained something. We've gained faith in the world. The world recognizes our right to exist. The world recognizes the Jewish right to be in the Temple Mount. One might argue, look, what we've done is compromise certain elements, gotten us the reward. I will say, at least as a parting sentence for this opening I just mentioned, I will say tragic reality. The Arabs, Israel's enemies, the Muslims, they stick to their principles. They are a principled people. Never mind their principles are completely perverted, completely obscene. They stick to their principles. When it comes to compromising principles, we seem to be pretty good at it. And when I say we, I'm talking about the Israeli government.
Right.
And many Jewish organizations in Canada, in the United States, we are so willing to compromise principles if only we get them to love us. And it's a game we will not win if we play it that way.
I remember hearing from Rabbi Kahana many occasions, I'm sure you too, that he said many years ago that the positions, and this is before Sharon gave up, certainly before Sharon gave up Gaza. Hang on. Certainly before he gave up Gaza, the rabbi wasn't alive at that point anyways. And he really didn't see much of a difference between, let's just say, parties. The Labor Party under a Peres and the Likud Party under a Shamir. That's what he said. And when you think about it in terms of the compromise, always, the Arab position is that the land, all of it, belongs to them. The Jewish position, we're compromising always. We're all right. Well, maybe you do have claim. Maybe we shouldn't go up to the Temple Mount because it's going to be offensive. But we could understand how it's offensive to the Muslims. We can understand that. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe 10 Jews who want to go up is 10 too many. Maybe if it was one. We let one go up, please, and he promises to be there for 2 minutes. Is that okay? You know, I remember when Yair Lapid was, I don't think prime minister at the time, I think as foreign minister under Bennett. And the riots were breaking out in Israel, and a lot of terrorism, a lot of major terrorist attacks. It's one of the reasons why Itamar Ben-Gvir was able to gather such incredible strength and run in the subsequent election. But I remember Yair Lapid, when the riots were breaking out and all this terrorism, and it was coming close to what they call Al-Quds Day. And they're having these Hamas rallies on the Temple Mount. And Yair Lapid went to East Jerusalem, close to the Damascus Gate, Shar Shechem. And he went there, and obviously the police are there and the army is there. And the Arabs took offense to that. How dare a minister of the Israeli government go there? At what point do Jews say, no, they want it all? There's just no point. At what point do we assert ourselves and say, you know what? The Torah, the Bible, it says the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. God gave it to us. And end of story. And that's it. You want to have peace with us? Fine. You don't want peace with us? Then no problem. We have the means, the capabilities to go to war and defeat you fully. What's it going to take, Meir?
International relations is nothing more than human relations on a larger level. The things that you've described, and there's so many others, have basically sent a message to the Arab of Jewish weakness. What we think is compromise, they see as weakness. What we see is a gesture of goodwill, they see as capitulation to the power that they are. And we've done that. When you mentioned, for example, then on the Temple Mount, and it happened 2 years, where the enormous banners of Hamas were flown. And contrary to Israeli law, contrary to police law, and Israel said, okay, we'll just be quiet about it. And the more quiet Israel was, the more emboldened the Arabs were. When we talk about, for example, this tragedy, this terrible tragedy of October 7th, and now the threat of Hezbollah, I'll remind the audience that in June and July of 2023, we're talking about just 3 months before the Arabs launched their assault on Israel in October 7th. Hezbollah had set up 2 encampments on Israel's northern border, so close to Israel that at times Israel said that they actually set up some tents, an enclave of sorts, in Israeli territory. Never mind the buffer zone, which they've ignored, the buffer zone which was established by UN Resolution 1701, they actually encroached. And what they were doing was testing to see what the Jewish resolve was going to be. And what responded to the Israeli government? The Israeli through the United Nations, actually petitioned the United Nations to tell Hezbollah, representing, of course, Iran, that they were too close to Israel, that at times they actually crossed the line and that they should back off. Well, they didn't. And what did they do? They intensified that position. What they were doing was testing to see what the Jewish or the Israeli response was going to be. And we found these are the conditions, the demonstrations and the enormous banners and the calling over the loudspeakers for the death of Jews on the Temple Mount, the encroachment of the northern border, and then we see, ignored by intelligence, the encroachment on Israel's southern border, that perimeter that Israel ostensibly established, which was supposed to be a kilometer deep, and then it became only 500 feet, 500 meters deep, and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden we saw all the films which were taken, the surveillance films by the Shmona Matayim, which is the 8200 cyber defense against terrorism. And we see that there were a convoy of Hamas operatives in uniform practicing their assault in Israel. And Israel thought, okay, we'll just let it go. There's no need to exacerbate the situation. By ignoring the Arab, Israel exacerbated the situation. Israel invited an attack by virtue of its being somewhat complicit to, well, this is the way that Arabs behave. And the Arabs became emboldened, and of course we saw October 7th. Hezbollah, its two encampments that it had on the north, the Golan, that could have been ended with one Israeli tank. Israel gives a warning. Israel brings an Israeli tank, the Merkava 4, and it ends the encampment. I guarantee you the Arabs would learn the lesson that we don't seem to want to teach them. And it's a terrible thing to say, but much of what's happened in Israel's 75, 76 years of existence is a result of Israel allowing the situation to deteriorate to a situation where the Arabs almost feel invited in order to strike against Israel. That can end with a strong Israeli fist. We see Israeli history doing it. Israeli history, every time that Israel has responded in a forceful manner, we've seen what the Arabs have done. They fold. And yet, if you look at modern Israeli history, the last 20 years, Israel folds less and less. Israel capitulates more and more, and the Arabs fold less and less. We seem not to learn the lessons of yesterday. We seem not to understand that the Arabs literally are gauging our reaction. What has compounded the situation, Meir, as we all know, is the fact that Israel used to always rely on having an American administration. Americans have been pro-Israel, more. But we have an American administration with Biden and Blinken and Jake Sullivan and Lloyd Austin and Samantha Power still behind the scenes that is virulently anti-Israel. Even Israel's protestations about the attack from Hamas was always shrouded with, we appreciate that the United States is supporting us. We appreciate that Joe Biden is with us. When we knew that it was a fraudulent lie, the Biden administration, the Blinken administration was never with Israel. The reason they brought the two aircraft carriers into the proximity was not, as we were told at the time, to warn Iran not to get involved. It was exactly the opposite. It was to demand that Israel step down. And every time that Israel threatened retaliation for whatever act of terrorism, rockets, missiles were fired, it was the United States that told Israel to stand down. I remind the people, as I did the last time we were on broadcast, that the attack happened on October 7th. On October 8th, Secretary of State Blinken put out a tweet on X in which he said he concurred with the foreign minister of Turkey, who basically said that there needs to be a cessation of hostilities and both sides needs to stand down. There needs to be a ceasefire. Mind you, this is on October 8th.
Right.
insanity. Israel didn't go in force on October 24th. And what happened in the Arab world, Hamas, Iran specifically, the recipient at different times of $10 billion, $6 billion, $10 billion, and sanctions relief of $85 billion. They know the United States is not only supporting Israel, the United States is actually sending billions of dollars to the very country who's controlling proxies, the Triple H, Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah, and it emboldened them. And when Israel threatened to respond, it was the Americans who shut Israel down. The tragedy here isn't that Blinken, Biden, and others did what they did. It's that Israel capitulated to that demand. And the moment that Israel capitulated to that demand, that was expected of them the next time and the time after. And the only time that Israel was able to, mind you, Israel was supposed to end this war with an incursion into Rafah, called in Israel. And Israel didn't. They stood down. What did Israel do instead? Israel sent all its brilliant ambassadors all over the world. Look, we're the most moral people in the world. We've allowed them to, we've given them water and food and medicine. We've opened up a humanitarian corridor from which they later sent missiles. Look what we warned them. It's no roof tapping, the roof knocking. We warned them before we attack. And when we opened up that humanitarian corridor, I don't know what the exact number, it was in the tens of thousands of Hamas terrorists who escaped that Israel could have destroyed in Gaza City.
Yeah.
We have created the circumstances of our own demise, and the Arab world has taken note. And there's only one thing that's going to reverse that, and that is the iron fist that Jabotinsky spoke about the iron fist that the Arabs are a vicious people. Islam is a terrible, terrible assault on everything that the Judeo-Christian and the Western civilization believes in. But they are not stupid. They are not stupid. What the Arabs have done successfully is found the useful idiots in the Western world and exploited them. And Israel sees that right today is as much against those useful idiots of the Western world as it is against the Arab neighbors who've been murdering Israeli children.
Let me, part of Israel's policy, as they state it, when they talk about the so-called day after, the day after the war finishes, whenever that's going to be, that Israel envisions setting up some kind of a self-governing authority in Gaza, composed of, we're not really sure, but the goal is to democratize the people there, to educate them in this way, and sort of like a denazification process with them. They call it something like that, and get rid of the Hamas ideology. Now, I recall, because we were talking the other day, discussing this a little bit the other day, that when there was the Gulf War and the U.S. Army went into Iraq and did what they had to do with Saddam Hussein, and they had a belief that they're going to democratize the people in Iraq. So the same kind of principle. So Meir explained that, because it didn't work out so well there.
It did not. It seemed that the Iraqis did not invite Jeffersonian democracy to their country. In fact, I wasn't going to do this yet. If you don't mind, I'd like to reference the piece that I mentioned earlier, which is the book that Daniel Pipes put out. And there's something incredibly telling about the way that we prosecute the war, that we try to prosecute a peace which is nonsensical. It's not there to be found. And more importantly, as you mentioned, the day after. So let me do this, if I may. Daniel Pipes is well known to most people. He's quite an accomplished academician, an expert on the Muslim world, the Arab world, a real expert. He's the head of Middle East Forum, a tremendous reputation. Used to teach at Harvard and also University of Chicago, and a very pompous man, I might add, but nonetheless a person who knows the Middle East. That said, it's remarkable how many intelligent people who know the Middle East, who know the Arab mind, nonetheless draw the wrong conclusions. And I want to give you an example. He just recently authored, it came out in June, a book which is titled Israel Victory, but it's subtitled Israel Victory, How Zion, now listen carefully to this, it's obscene. Israel Victory, How Zionists Win Acceptance and Palestinians Get Liberated. Get liberated from whom? He means they get liberated from Islam. And he goes on to talk about the fact, there's one point that he makes which is a very valid point, and I'm going to read that one sentence. He says, by early November, he's talking about the month after the October, the assault into Israel. By early November, it became clear that the Israeli security establishment is as hopelessly incompetent at the strategic level as ever, and is incredibly competent as it is at the tactical level, and that the mistakes will continue. Now, he's absolutely right about that, and I want to address that strategic level. The tactical level, we saw, of course, with Israel having taken out Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Israel's ability or its capability is incredible. If Israel fought the type of war it needs to fight, a military war rather than political war, Israel would not have the problem with its neighbors. It would still be condemned by the United Nations. It would be condemned by France. It certainly would be condemned by Blinken. But Israel would not, its children would be able to sleep in their own rooms rather than in bomb shelters. But I want to get to something. Daniel Pipes is an expert in the Middle East. And I read this whole thing, and I went to Amazon, and I read this page synopsis of what the book is about. The Palestinian Israel, thank you very much for that graphic. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Mind you, he has now adopted the language of the enemy. There is no Palestinian entity. There is no, the war is an Arab war. It's a Muslim war against Israel and the Jews. But Daniel Pipes, the expert of experts, talks about a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And he goes on to say that the Palestinian-Israeli, he says it time and again, he gives validation to this Palestinian myth. And we all know, anyone who knows anything about the Middle East, and Pipes should certainly be among them, should realize that the Palestinian entity is a myth that was created in the 1960s. Nonetheless, he goes on to talk about, on the Arab part, it's rejectionism. On the Jewish part, it's that they want to be accepted. So he says Palestinians, mind you, not Arabs, they're a negation of Jews, Judaism, Zionism, and Israel. And he basically says, his thesis, that in order for peace to somehow come at a future date, and when it does come, he believes that a viable Palestinian state can in fact exist, which is a perversion in understanding the realities. I went through this, and I also I've only read the first many pages of the thing, and the word Islam comes up only once. Oh God, Mr. Pipe, you are an expert on the Middle East, you're an expert in the Arabs, and the word Islam comes up only once? This isn't, why was there no peace in 1966? There was no occupied territories then. Why were Jews, as he mentions in the beginning of his book, why were Jews massacred in 1920, in 1921, in 1929, in 1936 to 1939? There was no Israel. It was Islam. This wasn't about territory. He says, and I'm quoting, both sides need an Israeli victory to break with the static pool of outdated mentalities. Pipe actually suggests that if we can convince the Palestinians that they should lose the war to Israel, that both sides will actually gain. Israel will gain the respect of the Palestinians, and Israel will no longer fear the murders of the Palestinians. Islam appears nowhere. This is an intelligent man who's lost his mind. I want to read you something else. He talks about the fact that 1967 was a disaster, the way that Israel handled it. I agree, but I think from a different perspective. Had Israel told the Arabs who were willing to flee, go, we spare your lives, go. But these territories which we liberated are ours. We would have been living in a very different world. Instead, what we did is we brought on Oslo. And as I read this, here it is. I'm reading for him. It says, nearly all the venom against Israel, the anti-Semitism, has to do with the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. It has nothing to do with Islam. And it's remarkable that this is a person, a brilliant authority in the Middle East, who simply draws the wrong conclusion. We've recognized territory. If the Palestinians can be given the honor, they will. And I want to come to what you just said, which was the bringing democracy to them. And he said, it's a great moment over here. It is. Pipes against the Zionist approach, advocating instead the traditional method of ending a war through victory. Palestinians give up, Israel wins, and they all. And what did he say? He says, once that happens, he says, then all of a sudden, this is a good one, they can be educated not to hate Israel. Once again, with a complete, it's almost an embarrassing betrayal of what the Arab principle is. Mr. Pike, do you not realize that Islam means more to them than Judaism certainly means to you? My God. And the reason I said Mr. Pipes is because he's a very pompous man and is angry right now that I'm not saying Professor Pipes and Dr. Pipes. Right. I'm looking at the table of contents. I'm almost done, Mayor. I'm looking at the table of contents, and I go through it. Palestinian rejectionism, explanation of virulence, explanation of tenacity. I'm going on and on. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4, Chapter 5. I'm getting down to Chapter 11 and beyond, and there isn't a single word, not in the table of contents, about Islam. About Islam. If you understand the enemy, you understand that they are, as I said, as perverted as it is, they're principled. They believe in the Quran. They believe that the Jews are evil. Read the Quran, Dr. Pipes, and you'll understand why there's no peace. But to suggest that Israel, he's right, that Israel needs a victory. But an Israeli victory doesn't come with teaching the Arabs how to be Western. It comes with the destruction of anything which is anti-Israel. And the tragedy that you and I have spoken about in several of these engagements was that Israel on October 8, 9, 10, 12, 24 spoke about it as they should have, and the world understood the destruction of Hamas. 4 months later, Israel began to talk about the defeat of Hamas. After that, Israel said, can't afford actually with Blinken Israel to lose to Hamas. Look how the media has changed and how we have allowed the Western world to browbeat us to the point where we are saying, but you can't let it, but you don't expect us to lose this war. The perspective, and never mind, perspective of geostrategic victory is the destruction of those who want to kill you.
Listen, 100%. I mean, when you cite Daniel Pipes, what you are citing, in essence, is what is referred to as the right wing of Hasbara.
Yeah.
And if the right wing of Hasbara is for a Palestine state,
not yet, in the future,
but in theory, right. And for a democratization of the Arabs, of the Muslims who are there, that are entrenched in Islam, that are fully supported by the Muslim world, at least the Shiite world, and much of the Sunni world as well, for sure. And there's the experience of Iraq. I think they tried it with Egypt also. You have to have a dictator running Egypt. Well, then the lesson is Israel has to have ruthless, strong leadership. That's the message of Egypt. And really subjugate the enemy.
Yes, actually, Meir, he makes that point very clear. His comment is, Pipes says that the future of Gaza, he said it can't be turned over to the Palestinian Authority. We agree. Certainly can't be left to the devices of Hamas. We agree. He said that Israel needs to find what he calls an element in Gaza, which is he called it a decent element in Gaza, which would be non-hostile to Israel. Israel should give it its backing, and it should be run like, and he called it a police state. And he gives examples. He said Egypt and Jordan are police states. Well, I'm not sure that police state and democracy go hand in hand, but that's a different issue. So he said, and he's right about the forceful hand, and he thinks like having a decent element of Arabs in Gaza wants Israel to give it its back support, that Israel can eliminate the negative elements of Gaza, and all of a sudden Gaza can be ruled by the indigenous element with Israel's overseeing it. I'm sorry, maybe he spent too much time, I don't know, doing other things and doesn't understand the way that modern history works, or maybe he should have turned into a psychology professor and understand, especially when it comes to the talk about the Islamic world, the Muslim world, that isn't how they think. And the mistake, by the way, that was made by the Western world, and always has been made by the Western world, we saw it in Vietnam, we see it elsewhere, is we of the Western world always think that we get the others who think unlike those in the Western world to think the way that we do. And it does say it's not going to happen soon, it might not happen, but it can happen, and when it happens, yes, we can see actually some kind of rapprochement with a peace with the Arabs. Mr. Pipes, Daniel Pipes, sorry, buddy. Sorry.
Okay, so to set up this so-called strongman who's going to rule in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, they call the West Bank, to get to that point, to have this person or persons, how many years does he envision that happening down the road? And how does that fit in with the ceasefire proposal that's being forced onto Israel?
Yeah, and the education, the entire education enterprise of the Arab world. In fact, there was a news story that was released today, not a shocker to anyone. It was also on Israel National News, whichever, which talked about the fact, and Moshe Phillips, I think, who just became the head of the Americans for Safe Israel,
right. Very good,
very good man, and a very good organization, came out and talked about the fact that all the publications which are being used by the school curriculum throughout the Arab world, certainly throughout the Palestinian Arab world, are virulently anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. Of course they are. So I don't know who Pipes wants to send in to teach these children to love, as I said, Jeffersonian democracy. But you gave an example, and it's one that needs to be further discussed, and that's Egypt. Egypt, Mubarak, basically was that iron, it was a police state, and he was pro-Western in the sense that he understood that the West was more of a friend than foe. He took advantage of the West with all the monies that were coming in. Egypt was a nation second only to Israel for many years as the amount of money that was brought in from the United States. But Mubarak, as this police commissioner of this large Arab nation, all of a sudden was overthrown, was defeated. By whom? By this fellow that we seem to have forgotten named Morsi.
Yeah.
Morsi represented what? Morsi represented the Muslim Brotherhood. And what is the ideology? What is the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood? It's let me see. Oh, I don't see it. It was Islam. Islam overthrew Mubarak. And I will find also those people who have short memories that newly acquired American President Barack Obama basically supported the Hamas
Yes.
Brotherhood takeover. Basically supported it. No different than his quiet acquiescence to the fact that the Iranians, the Islamic Republic of Iran, put down the revolt in 2009, the attempted revolt in Iran. So the American president, by not actually taking the right step, once again emboldened the West. It was only by circumstance of history that Morsi was finally taken down, put in prison as he should have been, ultimately died, that Egypt turned supposedly, ostensibly, to the Western camp until, of course, October 7th. And now we know something that Israel had been hiding from us. The United States, not wanting Israel to go into Rafah, was certainly hiding from us. And that is that Egypt, to a great degree, has been collaborating with Hamas with the tunnels and so on and so forth. Egypt it's better that Hamas gunfire be directed to the east against Israel rather than to the west against Egypt. Israel needs to understand, I think the way that I ended the last broadcast I did with you, I ended it by saying Israel needs to understand that it stands alone. Because it stands alone, it needs to do its best interest, not to try and foster relations with an American administration that's hostile to Israel. And if American Jews come to their senses, and so far they have not, American Jews will vote against this democratic machine. The Democratic Party is virulently anti-Israel. And if American Jews actually put their money, which they don't, behind the anti-Democrat Party, whether or anybody else, the Republicans, Israel will have attitude much different than it has today. And Israel, I hope, I trust, will come to us and do what it needs to do in order to defend its country in a manner which more of the enemy die and fewer of its own children die.
No, listen, 100%. We're almost done. The hour's almost up. So let me ask you a fast question.
Sure.
What action should Israel take against Iran right now? Or what action should Israel threaten Iran with right now? Iran is threatening to obliterate Israel. Israel has the capability, a lot of capabilities. What should they do?
Yeah. Well, Israel sort of missed many times. Israel's missed the opportunity to establish itself as a credible threat to Iran. The killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran was a brilliant tactical, as Pipes would say, and it's true, a brilliant tactical move to show Tehran, we can strike you in the heart of your nation. Now, understandably, the people of Iran, per se, are not enemies of Israel. It's the mullahs, it's the ayatollahs, it's the religion, it's Islam. It isn't the secular, it's Islam.
Yeah.
Israel needs to send a message. It needs to warn the world. It needs to tell Europe. It needs to tell the United States. Too many of our one was too many. But too many of our children have died, and the war isn't close to being over, not the way that it needs to be over, which means with the destruction of Hamas, which was the original goal. And the Hezbollah, we all know, is much stronger than Hamas. What Israel needs to do is send a message loud and clear, and if they've got to demonstrate it, they need to do it the moment we get off the show, and they should say, we're going to do what Meir said. Israel needs to strike the oil of Iran. Iran is a country which a few years ago, when Trump was president, which was struggling to survive economically, and which today, according to the GDP experts of the world in Europe, the finance say that they're coming to a windfall just recently of $235 billion. With $235 billion, you can take a couple of billion, you can finance the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah. When your oil fields are aflame, when they are aflame, all of a sudden you become a country that is economically depressed, in trouble. That's what Israel should do. Will Israel do it? Of course they won't, because Israel has learned not to do the right thing. Should Israel threaten to do it? Israel should threaten to do it. Israel should, and the fact that they took out Ismail Haniyeh and many other terrorists, from both Hamas and Hezbollah. Israel's capability is brilliant. Its resolve to deliver that brilliance is somewhat in check. The moment that Israel says, that's it, we've taken off the handcuffs, we will not allow Haifa to be taken by rockets coming from Hezbollah, we will destroy the oil fields of Iran. Check. That's my suggestion. And we can all live happily ever after.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. For sure. Okay, Meir, final words, final comment, because down to like 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. A final word. If one studies Jewish history, one notices that every great thing that's happened in Jewish history, every great thing, was always something, the undertaking of the Jewish minority against, in most cases, the concerns and the fears of the Jewish majority. If we are brave, if we stand up, if we realize that what we have given the world is something that needs not to be taken for granted, that we are people who pursue peace, and we are also people who will do whatever we can and whatever we must in order to preserve Jewish history. That expression, it's that expression. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Well, the road to hell is also paved with too many dead Jews, and that needs to stop. Israel needs a right-wing government that is unafraid of the Supreme Court, that is unafraid of the Western media, that's unafraid of its own media. Israel needs to do what's best for Israel and let the chips fall where they may. And I will promise you this, it'll be a much better and a much brighter future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Meir.
Hey, before we click out, we have so many hundreds and hundreds of people listening and watching. I'm going to post some of their comments on the screen, just, people are paying attention.
Okay, let's see some comments.
Let's do that, and they keep coming in fresh all the time. So we'll start from the most recent. The most recent is just a thanks. So thank you guys for doing this. Before that, the comment was, yes, well said, stand your ground, of course. Then there's a comment that the Arab attributes to Israel provides a good historical analysis, but I want to look that up. But I think very important from Starhopper is prophetic, that babysitting 7th century Nazis in perpetuum doesn't sound like a great plan, and that's basically what we've been doing. Okay?
Amen.
And as the Talmud says above, that who comes to kill you, get up early and kill him first, and that's what Israel's been doing lately. Because we do know that, as Canadian Sunset said, Arab moderates kill Jews moderately.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And
gentlemen, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Meir. Thank you very much. We'll take it up shortly. Maybe next week or the week after. Excellent.
I'll be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, Meir.
Shalom, shalom.
And someone says that Palestinians will never live in peace with Israel. They grow up with the victim mentality and live in revenge mode 24/7. I can go on. There's so many comments. We want to thank you, everybody who has commented, who's been listening, who's been sharing. And Meir, if you have any final comment before we click off.
This final comment is that whoever's still watching, I'll be on in another 3 hours. I'll be live with Baruch Ben Yosef. He'll be right on Har Bayit, right on the Temple Mount, and we'll be broadcasting live from Har Bayit in 3 hours, 12 o'clock midnight Eastern Standard Time. It will be tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, Israel time. So thank you very much, everyone, and please share this. We appreciate that. Thank you.